Hello, everybody. Welcome to Inside the Trojans Huddle this week. We have a new lineup, as you can see. Eric McKinney is in Scotland. McKinney is a pretty Scottish name. It makes sense that he would be there. And because we needed adult supervision for the first time ever, we have somebody other than Greg Katz, Eric McKinney, are the two of us joining us on Inside the Trojans Huddle. Many of you probably recognize him, Scott Schrader. Scott is a recruiting guru, has been reporting on recruiting for, I don't know, Scott, 100 years, 110 years? How long has it been?
It's I think it's about roughly that long. You know, when you start covering the grandkids of the players you first started covering, you know you've been doing it for a while.
Scott made his name covering Red Grange's recruitment, and since then has been a star. Coming from Houston, we'll talk about why he's in Houston in just a minute. Other than that, we got the usual crew. Mark Culkin is here. I'm your substitute host. We have some interesting stuff to talk about, so that's enough windup. Oh, by the way, I think we still have that special deal going, right? Mark, do you have any idea?
I believe we're still doing if you say USC 1, you'll get 2 months. Is that right, Scott?
2 months for a
that is
buck. That's a
correct.
real ride here. Okay, so if you haven't done that, go do it, please. I mean, look, it's the middle of July. That gets you the middle of September. That's going to get you. I mean, that's going to cover LSU. It's going to cover Michigan. I mean, come on. What are you doing?
We'll be talking about the national championship by that time.
Well, I mean, that's incredible. See, we brought an optimist on here. Usually, it's just Mark and me complaining when Greg is here. Geez. All right, so do that if you haven't done it. If you want to click like on the program, do that too. I'm told it helps us. Even if you don't like the program, click like. Just do it as a favor. Okay, here we go. Let's jump in. Let's start with a recruiting update, which makes sense, especially because Scott is here. Scott, you're in Houston. You came to Houston to see who, and I think it's probably a guy who just gave us a commitment. What's going on?
Yes, well, I've been in Texas for a couple of weeks. I was in Dallas, and there was hope that Riley Pettijohn may commit to USC, and then there was hope a week later that Dalen McCutcheon, receiver from Lovejoy High School in Lucas, Texas, would also commit. You know, it was one of those deals where they finished second again. So I decided to roll up to Houston to see Tanook Hines, a wide receiver that committed to USC yesterday. So that was a big deal. And I also made my way over to see Andrew Marsh, a receiver here in nearby Katy, Texas.
So let's talk about Tanook. Good looking player from what I've seen on film and on paper. I mean, he's not a huge guy the way Corey Sims is a big receiver, but he has size and he can run. Second in Texas in the 200 and a 10-5 100-meter guy. That's flying. What should we know about Tanook Hines, Scott?
Well, I think I think you described him pretty well. You know, just on the surface. You know, you're going to have a guy who has the speed. You know, can stretch defenses, but a lot of times these fast guys are maybe not one-dimensional, but they're not multi-dimensional. And I think what you get with Tanook Hines is you get a guy that's going to, be a deep threat. You're going to get a guy that you can throw bubble screens to. He's a guy you can hand the ball off to, but he's going to run, nice routes where you can line him up in the slot. But I think what stands out most to me, and I think a lot of other people kind of saw the same thing, is how tough he is. He's not easy to bring down. Great hands. He's a guy that's going to go high point the ball and get up there and play a lot taller than his 6'1", height. So I just think overall, USC considered him really, really high on their receiver board, and it was a big pickup for USC.
So, Mark, what do you think of Hines? And then more generally, where are you on USC's wide receiver recruiting this year? What do you think?
So I'll start with Nunu. Are we allowed to call him Nunu? Is that
Of course. Yes.
So, Nunu, number one, I actually got confirmation pretty much with everything that Scott just said. Oklahoma fan who, watches my other show, said, you guys are getting a really good player. He goes, I've watched Hines play in high school and he's really good. In fact, it was described as he's fast. And you guys talk about his 100-meter time. He's 4.41 in the 40. I mean, that's elite level athleticism. So yeah, he can take the top off the defense, but you know, you put him in the slot, and he might not be Zachariah Branch type of human joystick, but he's going to be able to mess around with the defense, you know, in open space. And if he has that type of dog mentality, you know, that like an Amon-Ra St. Brown plays with, that's even better. I mean, you don't have to be the biggest guy in the room to play like you're the biggest guy in the room. So I love what they're getting here. And as far as the wide receiver room, um, I think I've heard Scott mention it once or twice that they're looking for at least, you know, minimum of 4 guys. They might be there right now if you want to throw in Dewan Morris, the athlete. But right now they've got 3 wide receivers: Romero Ison, Corey Sims, and now Nunu. So maybe one more big wide receiver out there, you know, someone in the mold of a Deuce Robinson or a Jacoby Lane, someone like that, I think would be the perfect complement, you know, to this recruiting cycle.
Or Andrew Marsh, because he would be a
Or Andrew
perfect complement to any recruiting cycle.
Sure, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm pretending I'm a head coach and I can't talk about recruits specifically.
Yeah. Look, put that 100-meter time in context. 10.5 is what Adoree ran in college.
That's good.
Reggie ran a 10.4 in high school. I mean, that is moving. And you can't fake that. When you get to the Texas State Championship level, these are not hand times where people are doctoring things. It's legit. So this is a kid that can really run. A nice compliment to the big receiver from Missouri, and so a pretty good crew. I mean, look, it's disappointing to lose McCutcheon. USC's had a string of disappointing second place finishes in recruiting. We know that. And I know that USC fans were getting a little down on the wide receiver recruiting, which would seem to be a very strange thing for a Lincoln Riley team. But I think if you look at who they have in the fold right now, if those guys stick, that's a pretty solid foundation with those 3 guys. And they probably will add another one. But even if they don't, that's a good group, and that's a group that's going to make plays, it seems to me. What do you think? What do you think, Scott? You want to make any? I know you love this. You want to make a prediction on another wide receiver? Okay, how about this? Is USC going to get another wide receiver in this class? How about that? Go ahead.
If they would have gotten a commitment from Dalen McCutcheon and Hines, they would have been done with recruiting wide receivers for this class. So they would have been happy with 4. There's no, you know, they don't have to take 4, but do I think they're going to get another wide receiver? You know, I think a lot of it is just going to be predicated on whether or not some of these guys, you know, hold off on committing or, you know, flipping, and they come for visits in the fall. You know, you're at the point right now, I don't think without any further visiting and showing, you know, the level of interest is high, I don't think they're probably going to get another receiver. But they're going to continue going after Phillip Bell, and they're going to continue going after Andrew Marsh, and you know they're also going to continue going after Dalen McCutcheon. I don't think they're going to give up on him, and I think that, you know, as we've seen in other years where teams start off slow and the recruiting isn't necessarily going that great. We can even look back to 2017 recruiting class for USC. You know, that recruiting class before the season started, especially after 4 weeks of the football season, you know, that was a trash looking recruiting class, and they ended up like number 3 or 4. So, you know, I think you're looking to see how the season goes. And anytime that you're successful on the field and you're showing results, the guys start looking at your football program differently. They feel that energy, even if they're not around it. You know, you can't help but feel the energy. So, if I had to bet, I would bet they will add another receiver.
So here we are. We're almost to the season. We had a class that looked like it was going to be a top 3 class, a top 5 class. I suspect that's not going to happen now. Although if they beat LSU and beat Michigan and they're ranked number 5 in the country, who knows? But what's the state of recruiting? What should USC fans think looking at the board right now? Should they feel disappointed? Should they feel okay? Should they be angry with Coach Riley? Should they say, no, we got exactly what we want? I mean, where should they be? What do you think, Mark? Where should USC fans be recruiting wise right now?
They need to be patient. I understand the angst. I mean, I feel a little bit of it at times as well. But look, we can point a finger towards NIL's direction. We can point our finger at the coaching staff's direction. We can point a finger at the new paradigm shift that's going on with the recruits themselves, knowing that, they're kind of in control of the situation right now. There's plenty of things that, we could say this needs to change. Bottom line, it's that what Lincoln Riley did last year, holding on to Alex Grinch for the year too long. Defense, when you tease your team going 11-1 regular season and saying, look, we're going to the playoffs, and then you start making decisions that maybe prohibited you from getting to the playoffs in year one, and then it just carried over and snowballed in year two. I think people are a little skeptical, and they just want to see Lincoln Riley show that 2023 was an outlier. And once everybody's seen that 2023 is an outlier, I think we can move forward and people will feel a little bit more confident. Right now, there's just a lot of negative recruiting going on. So until USC can say, all right, until we prove it, you're going to be able to talk the talk. We got to walk the walk. And that's kind of where USC is right now.
So, Scott, let me give you two scenarios and you tell me what happens to USC's recruiting class on the two. Scenario number one, USC beats LSU, they beat Michigan, they start the season 3-0, they're in the top 5. The defense looks dramatically better than it has been for, I don't know, since 2008. That's scenario number one. Scenario number two, USC gives up 40 to LSU, gives up 38 to Michigan, and starts the season 1-2. Those two scenarios dramatically impact this recruiting class, yes?
Absolutely. I mean, both directions, right? Yep. I think there's absolutely no question about it. If you're going to go out and look colossally awful across the board, and it looks like it's Groundhog Day, yeah, there's going to be some major issues. I think that you're going to lose at least a couple of your top recruits. And it's certainly gonna be hard to go out and get a few guys. And on the other end of the spectrum, just like in years past, and you hear with other programs, the phone starts ringing from, you start getting phone calls from people you hadn't heard from for a while. Guys that we aren't even thinking about right now will be calling USC. So yeah, it's going to be very significant, and God forbid it should be the bad scenario.
No, we don't want that. I shouldn't even speak that into existence. But Mark mentioned NIL. Kirby Smart was complaining just within the last day or so.
I saw that.
For him.
Oh.
I mean, look, and it's something coming from Kirby Smart too, because obviously Lanning is his former assistant, and you don't lob a comment like that against your former assistant unless you're unhappy about NIL. But look, it is what it is. Phil Knight is going for broke, and we'll see what happens. Okay, let's do this. Let's move on to our position preview. We over the previous 3-4 episodes, we hit the offensive side of the ball. So today, let's move to defense. Let's talk about USC's secondary and what we should expect from USC secondary this year. We all know that the secondary has been a near disaster for about 3 or 4 years now. And I say near disaster because I'm an optimist and a nice person. It was probably more than a near disaster. It was an absolute grease fire for the last 3 or 4 years. So, Mark, start us off. What do you think? What should we expect from USC's secondary this year? Is this a position group we should be excited about?
I anticipate seeing the same secondary that I saw perform in the Holiday Bowl, and only that group getting better, because they don't have that yoke around their neck anymore. You actually saw the talent on the roster kind of show what they're capable of doing when they're actually put in a position to be successful. So you look at the cornerback position. You love the size, right? I mean, everyone's 6'2" or above going across the board. Marcellus Williams might be the smallest, yet he might be the most talented of that group, and he's just a true freshman. So plenty of depth, lots of experience. You brought over a new defensive coordinator, Danton Lynn, who specializes working with safeties. You brought over a new secondary coach, Doug Belk, who, by the way, USC outbid Georgia for, who was part of Alabama's staff at one time. So you know he comes from a good tree of developing players. I would say the secondary is probably, not even probably, it is by far the strength of USC's defense in 2024, as far as experience, depth, the ability to make plays. I love what Kamari Ramsey brings to the roster. I'm looking forward to seeing what Achille Arnold could do. You know, in fact, what was it, on three, you know, they didn't think USC's wide receiver group was worthy of top 10 consideration in the country, but they did make the secondary a top 10 group, or was the safeties. And that's even with Kalen Bullock being, you know, going off to the NFL. So, you know, if it's addition by subtraction with coaching staff, as well as, you know, transfer portal guys, with recruiting guys coming up through the program, I love the secondary.
Scott Mark loves the secondary. You love the secondary?
You know, I think what was kind of lost among a lot of USC fans, you know, with the focus being on trying to land some linemen this spring in the transfer portal, what was the fact that USC really added a lot of, you know, proven really good football players in the wintertime in December. You know, and Mark mentioned one, Achille Arnold and Kamari Ramsey, and you know, you have John Humphrey came with him over from UCLA. So you got DeCarlos Nicholson, and I mean, you got some really big, talented guys that you're not wondering how they're going to play this year. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate over to USC and they're going to knock it out of the park. We've seen that with other transfers where it didn't necessarily translate all that well to USC. But these guys are different than linemen. You know, you watch these guys go out and have success at UCLA and Oregon State and be among the top players in the conference. You know what you're getting. So, yeah, I think the secondary is going to be, you know, really impressive this season. I think not only from a coverage standpoint, you're going to see a bunch of guys that are making tackles. And I think that was another issue that you saw at USC across the board, was just how poorly they tackled. And if you're tackling poorly in the secondary, it's a touchdown. So I think you have guys that are going to be able to really play physical football. You're going to have guys that are going to be are athletic. They're long. And what really stood out to me as much as anything from the spring game was that these guys were in position to make plays. You know, we didn't get to see them practice in the springtime, so we really didn't know what was going on. And what, you know, you start wondering if the feedback you're getting from people is like every other year in spring ball. You know, it looks great, looks way different. And you're just kind of like, all right. This year, I think across the board, all of us here would agree it looked different in the spring game, the way they looked defensively. So that position group is going to be strong, yes. And Marcellus Williams is definitely worthy of a mention. You know, he was the guy that I always felt was the most ready to come in and play day one of all the guys they were recruiting from cornerback or safeties. And I think that he kind of proved that in the spring.
Yeah, look, a couple of things really jump out about this group to me. Mark mentioned one of the length of these guys. I mean, I was a 5'8" corner, so I'm partial to 5'8" corners. There are no 5'8" corners on this roster. These guys are big. They have long arms, and the depth. I mean, if you're talking about having guys like Marcellus Williams and Zion Branch and Christian Pierce on your bench, these are guys trying to get on the field. That means you've got a good group, because those three guys are going to be fantastic football players. And so I'm excited about the other thing that and Mark mentioned this in terms of the new defensive coordinator, a new secondary coach. Let's not forget just how often USC's coaching staff left the secondary in terrible positions over the last few years. I mean, if people who understand secondary play watch the games and got this. If you don't know, I've complained about it multiple times during Alex Grinch's tenure. The number of times USC would be in cover zero, where guys are manned up with no deep help, and they're not bringing more than 4 guys. I mean, it's that combination. That combination is, to me, absurd. And it's if you're doing it every once in a while to mix something up, it's still absurd. But if you're doing it frequently and putting your guys in a position where they just don't have a chance, where you have safeties covering explosive slot receivers with no deep help, and you're not getting pressure on the quarterback. I mean, USC fans have a right to be critical of USC's secondary players because they didn't play very well much of the time. But let's keep in mind just how often those guys were put in bad spots by Alex Grinch. And I'm not at all convinced that the change from Dante Williams to Doug Belk isn't a gigantic step in the right direction. I know Dante has his fans out there. I know he's a fantastic recruiter. I didn't see anything from his corners the entire time he was at USC to suggest that he was developing guys. I think he's good at developing relationships, but not corners. I think you're going to see a completely different secondary this year. I'm really excited to watch it. The one position I would look out for right now is the nickel position. I think most USC fans probably assume Jalen Smith. He played, he's the starter there last year. He's coming back, will be the guy. I don't know. I don't know about that. Jalen played well in the bowl game. He struggled most of the year. They went out and got Greedy Vance, who I think is pegged as a nickel. Don't be surprised if somebody other than Jalen Smith is in that spot. But if Jalen Smith is in that spot, that means he's beating out some pretty good guys to do it. And so I think we'll see the best of Jalen Smith regardless. Okay, so I think we're all on board. This is a good group. I don't know what the defense is going to look like. I think the defense will be better this year. We'll talk about the other position groups in coming weeks. But I feel pretty comfortable saying I think this secondary is going to be solid. I think these guys are going to line up in the right spot. They're going to do their assignment. They're going to make plays. It is not going to be what we've seen so often, pitch and catch to wide open guys up and down the field and miss tackles along the way. I don't think we're going to see that this year. Okay. So we're in agreement. We all feel good about the secondary. It's nice to be positive like that. It doesn't happen all the time. It's because we have Scott with us. Okay. Let's move on to the next topic. This is sort of a historical one, although you could pick a recent guy. I want your biggest surprise ever from a USC recruit. A guy that when you're watching him in high school, you thought, I don't know about this guy. I'm not sure it makes sense. But then when he's at USC, he becomes, a superstar, or at least a big-time contributor that you didn't expect. You got any names? Scott, you have any guy like that in mind?
Damn. You know what? When I was reading the question that you texted, I spent some time trying to think of an answer for this one. And it just leads you to the conclusion that, God, we remember all of the busts, but we never remember the guy we thought were going to be busts and ended up really good. So I really don't have an answer for this one that hopefully would make a whole lot of sense. But the only guy that popped into my head, I was going to say, I never saw him in high school, so I would have said Sonny Bird would have been one of those guys. But it's not like he killed it in college. But I would have never thought that he would have played a single down in college, let alone for Pete Carroll. So
I suspect Sonny didn't either.
Yeah. So you could probably throw Petros Papadakis in there as well.
That's an interesting one. Mark, who you got? You got a guy?
So I'm not going to take it to the extreme of I thought he was a bust in high school. However, I think Brett Nealon is probably a good candidate for this conversation. Did I think he would end up being USC starting center and doing a really good job? Probably not. So again, it's one of those, I won't call it a tough question, but like Scott said, you remember the guys who you thought were coming in, they're can't miss guys. You don't really focus on we hope they do good guys.
I tell you, I've got one. It's going to sound a little bit weird. Matt Leinart. And I know Matt Leinart was an Elite 11 guy. He played obviously on some very good modern day teams. But here's the thing. I watched him in high school and I thought, He's not much of an athlete. He has a very average arm. I knew that he had actually split time a little bit with Matt Grudegood at quarterback his junior year, and I thought, I'm guessing Dan Marino didn't split time as a junior with a defensive player at quarterback, and so I was hopeful that he would be a good player, and I thought there was a chance he could be. I never saw Matt Leinart coming into USC and having arguably the best resume of any college quarterback of all time. I didn't see that happening, right? I mean, he was not that level of recruit. Nobody's that level of recruit. But Mark, you want to say something?
There's rumor or story that he almost left USC if he wasn't named the starting quarterback that year. I mean, I don't know how much validity or how much truth there is to that, but there was a lot of smoke behind the scenes that, hey, Matt Leinart is he's considering leaving the program. If you remember, there was a lot of quarterbacks on that roster at the time. So it was like Norm Chow, make a decision, and I guess they made the decision, and it all worked out in the end.
Look,
the spring game that year, the spring game that year, the year that Leinart ended up getting the starting gig, was still to this day the worst spring game I've ever seen at USC. and Matt Leinart was a big reason for that. So yeah, I kind of like feeling on that one. I didn't really see him playing high school either, but there are guys, we could like throw out Clay Matthews and Chenna Nwosu, and you could throw those guys out there, but I don't think I was ever thinking, huh?
I think Uchenna is a perfect example.
Yeah.
Perfect example.
Yeah. I mean, Kenichi Adeze is a guy like that too. Remember, he was extremely overweight in high school, and the guy that we remember at USC, the guy that had what was it, 18 sacks, whatever he had his third year in the program, or his third year as a starter. Chiseled. That ain't the guy that showed up on USC's campus. There was no reason to think that guy was going to be an All-American and a high draft choice. You look at him and thought, I don't know what this guy's supposed to do here. But another example of a guy who kind of flies in under the radar. Nobody expects much from him and becomes an absolute monster. And Kenichi Adeze was a monster.
Does Tuli Tuipulotu walk into this category?
No.
I mean, Marlon.
No, I knew I didn't know he was going to be, take off as a rookie in the NFL after 3 years at USC type of guy. But no, there was no doubt in my mind he was going to be a good player.
You have the Mike Williams example too. Mike was a big guy, and I think the USC coaches were really excited about him. But the Florida schools wanted to turn him into an edge rusher. He wasn't a burner. He looked like he might become a tight end. Against Kansas State, early his freshman year, he couldn't catch a cold. Like, he probably had 6 or 7 drops in that game. It was horrific. And I think, a 3-star recruit, this isn't a guy who people thought wasn't going to be able to play. Like I said, I think the USC coaches were pretty excited about him. But I didn't expect him as a true freshman, much less to become maybe one of the most dominant receivers I've ever seen at USC. No, one of the most dominant receivers I've ever seen in college football anywhere. That guy was incredible. I don't know that I would have expected that guy to be an absolute monster and a first-round pick, right? I mean, that was kind of surprising. So here's the thing, though. What this means is, keep in mind that we always want the 5-star players. And look, the guys who are blue chip, the Carson Palmers, Reggie Bushes, the guys that people look at and say, okay, that guy's immensely talented. Those guys don't always turn out, but they have a pretty decent chance. But you never know on these. You never know which of these 3 stars under the radar guys might turn out to be an absolute stud at some point in the future. That's one of the fun things about recruiting.
And let me just say this too. Let me just add this too. With the star rankings, there's less of a chance you're going to be wrong if there's a consensus among the recruiting networks and whatnot, and offers and all that kind of guy. kind of things about whether a guy's chances of being good or not. Your chances seemingly are increased greatly. But with the advances on what these guys have available to them now in order to evaluate kids, whether it's the film that they're getting from the schools or whether it's these data-driven camps by Under Armour and whatnot, where you get, as many different testing categories filled, your quotas of speed, explosiveness, all the athleticism boxes are checked from these guys. So I just think that it's a lot easier to be right on the guys that aren't 4- and 5-star guys in 2024 than it was in 2004.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I think there are certain positions where it's easier to be right. I can watch a high school running back play, and I can tell you whether the guy's going to be able to play in college, right? That's pretty easy. You watch Reggie Bush's highlight or Josh Jacobs' highlight film out in Las Vegas, right? You watch that highlight film, you go, okay, that guy will play. I feel good about him. Quarterbacks are a completely different story, right? It's really tough to judge quarterbacks, and Matt Leinert's a good reason for it, because you look at Matt, he's got the height, but other than that, he looks average in a lot of areas. But what you couldn't judge from that is a guy who is a leader, who plays extremely well under pressure, who makes good decisions, right? You don't know that stuff until you see a guy playing on Saturday. So that's a really tough position to predict, and there are a few like that. There's some defensive tackles you look at, that guy's going to play in the NFL. Easy. I know that guy's going to play in the NFL. But there are other positions where you don't always know.
Yeah.
Okay, how about this one? Tell me the recruiting battle you were most disappointed to see USC lose. And then tell me how it ultimately turned out for USC and that player. I think I've got a good one on this, but Mark, start us off. What do you got?
And there's been a few over the years. One that really stuck out to me, though, when I read your question, Ronald Powell, linebacker, edge player. What was it? Well, it wasn't Centennial. He was out there in the Inland Empire.
He was at Redlands East Valley, I think. Is this where he was at?
Good enough for me.
Yep.
Really good play. In fact, I think he was considered like the #1 defensive player, maybe not in the country, but definitely in California. I mean, he was elite. And it was a battle between USC and Florida. Urban Meyer was doing his thing at that time, getting messages from God, getting offensive linemen to commit. Or, if that didn't work, you would hire Ronald Powell's high school coach and bring him on staff. And ultimately, that's, I think, what, got them the deal. Now, when he got to Florida, he had some injuries, but he was starting to come into his own before those injuries took over. So ultimately, he got a shot in the NFL. Again, injuries kind of got to him. Short career. And the really sad ending to the story, earlier this year, he was found dead. And I'm not sure if they figured out how he died, but he did send out like a really cryptic message. Make sure, you're keeping your mental sharp and you're happy, and let people know who's in your life, let them know you care about them, that type of stuff. So I think he was at a crossroads. Whatever happened, but that player in particular really stuck out. I wasn't hoping it didn't have this kind of ending. But when I did a little bit further research, it's like, oh wow, he's dead.
Yeah.
42
Yeah, I remember that recruitment. That was disappointing. What do you got, Scott? What's the one you were most disappointed to see USC lose?
I need to say Rancho Verde was the high school that Ronald Powell went to, but I think that for me it's if you want to look back and kind of look at like DeAnthony Thomas, Deshaun Jackson, and those guys. Those are like the easy guys to pick. Yeah. I'm gonna go personal on this one. That was disappointing on a personal level, and that's Bryce Young. This was a guy I got to know. I got to know Bryce. I mean, when I first started my own site, I used to go out to these passing leagues, like every one of them that was available to me that I could get to. And everyone that Cathedral High School was at where Bryce Young was at the time as a freshman, I went to. And I just remember watching this guy, gosh, in the spring and the summertime, probably about 12 to 15 times. Got to know his family. He committed to USC, but as we saw with a lot of the top guys, the elite guys at USC had guys that had dreamed to go to USC. That luster of USC being their dream school had worn off so significantly under the Clay Helton years that he ended up committing to Alabama, and he never did win the championship that he went on, that he went there to go win, but he won a Heisman and they were knocking at the door. And if you look back, business decision wise, it was the right decision. But for me, it was extremely disappointing because where are we on Saturdays? We're at the Coliseum or wherever USC is playing on the road. So, sometimes we get biased on where we want guys to go to school because they're so good at the game and they have so much passion and they're so good at it that, you want to be able to see them play live. But that was it for me. But I'll be honest with you, there were several over the last decade.
Yeah, those two you mentioned were definite heartbreakers. Other than here's the one that jumped out at me, and I mentioned him a few weeks ago randomly in the show. Lorenzo Booker. Lorenzo Booker got immense hype, like crazy levels of hype. Kid from Southern California. This is before Pete Carroll resurrected USC's program, and so there was already for me this immense jealousy for these other programs that were winning when USC struggling with the Paul Hackett's of the world. And I remember when Booker picked Florida State, how disappointing that was. Turns out he didn't have a great career there, and USC ends up, a recruiting class later, picking up a pretty decent running back or two with Reggie and Lindell. So it turned out okay. But I just remember at the time thinking, this is terrible. I mean, we're struggling, and when you have a superstar guy like this who's considering us, and we can't get him because Bobby Bowden comes all the way across country and steals him away. That one hurt, and I did not enjoy it. But that's one of those. It turned out okay, so we don't have to worry about it anymore. But anyway, okay, good ones. All right, so last question before we jump in, or no, we got two more quick questions. What are the biggest things you would like to see change when it comes to recruiting? I'm not talking about USC recruiting. I'm just talking about how recruiting is done in college football today. What would you like to see change? Scott, you're neck deep in this stuff every day. What would you like to see change?
Yeah, I don't know if there's really anything specific from the recruiting part that I would like to see changed. I think there's just too many rules to begin with. I think that limiting these guys on how many times, like what times a year they can go visit a school, what time of year the coaches can go visit a school. If you talk to some of these players, and I don't talk to just some of them, I talk to a lot of them over the years. They don't understand why the coaches can't come out and visit them whenever they feel like at their high schools. Maybe you have a situation where you have to call ahead and get permission. I think you already do anyways at times. But I think some of those things, and I'm not going to sit here and go off on that because those are changes that are probably never going to change. But I just think the one change that I think needs to be, we need to see the ability to transfer whenever you feel like it is like the one thing, and it encompasses everything. Recruiting, whether it's team stuff. I just think at some point the game, I think we're going to move on to another topic that kind of touches on something like this, but I just think that at some point, if there's not some structure that's added to college football, we'll talk about this on another topic, but I just think there's going to be some serious issues with fan interest down the road.
Yeah, what do you think, Mark?
Yeah, here's what I would do. And I think I've touched on this topic before. I would get rid of the signing periods, both of them, December and February. Just get rid of them. No more verbal commitments. Make a decision. Go collect your signing bonus check from whomever the collective is at whatever university. Sign your employment contract, and that you're planning to play football at USC and maybe go to class on occasion. And that kind of answers Scott's other point about transferring. You're under contract. You break the contract, there's going to be a penalty. You can't just transfer. So that's how I would fix recruiting. If we're going to play the game, if these 16, 17, 18-year-olds are going to play the game of, hey, you know what? I'm the interviewer. Well, let's treat you like an adult now. You're not going to give us your word anymore. You're going to put your name on a piece of paper, and then you're going to get paid. And then we're going to treat you like a semi-professional football player. That's how I fix recruiting.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I used to tell people all the time when they ask, well, why do you like college football more than the NFL? One of the things I'd always tell them is because the guys I love in college, those guys will always be USC Trojans. Marcus Allen is never going to be anything other than a USC Trojan, right? Junior Seau is never going to be anything other than a USC Trojan. I can't really say that anymore, can I? I mean, guys bounce around, and you have guys on the USC roster from UCLA. One guy on the USC roster from UCLA who was previously on the USC roster. I mean, it is a completely new world, and while I like it that players have more freedom than they did before, I think the old transfer rules were too restrictive, especially with coaches bouncing around the way they were. The current lack of anything enforceable that makes sense really is a problem for the game. So I agree with both of you guys on that. And you know what? I think Scott's right. This may come up again in a minute. So that's all I'm going to say. Okay, last question before we play our game. I don't know if you guys saw it. The AP all-time football program list came out this past week. Some sort of formula based on AP rankings. Alabama 1, Ohio State 2, Oklahoma 3. Michigan, Notre Dame, USC, Texas, Nebraska, Penn State, USC, Texas, Nebraska, Penn State, and Tennessee. So it seems to me the top six are no-brainers. If you ask anybody the top 6 programs of all time, those are the 6 they give you. I don't know if they give it to you in that order. What's your impression, guys? Does this list get it right, or does it not get it right? What do you think, Scott?
It's hard to argue that it's wrong. I think we all kind of have our own thoughts on maybe what the criteria should be. I mean, if this list is it's just done by the AP, or they kind of go by AP rankings overall and championships one. I don't even know what the criteria really was, but
it's weeks ranked. Wasn't that the science they used? How many weeks they were ranked in the AP poll?
Okay.
I think the formula was more complicated, but I think that was a big piece of it.
Okay. I looked at the list and read your question, and I started, trying to think of some programs, and, I think that, I think LSU could probably make an argument that they belong in there, but, it's not like these programs, you can look at them and go, God, you got to take them out for sure.
Yeah.
I'm certainly not going to do that.
There are no losers on the list.
What's that?
There are no losers on the list. I think we can agree on that.
That's a good list, right? You look at it, it's hard to go, God, that list looks like shit. Like half the other lists that we see on social media every day.
Yeah.
It's like who the fuck made that list? Pardon my French, but it's kind of like, no, this list, but there are some programs that have kind of in recent years been pretty darn strong and consistently, and LSU is one of those programs that's won multiple national championships in the last 20 years, right? So you kind of have to kind of factor that in. But I think that list looks pretty darn good. And anytime you can see USC's list in the top 10 nowadays, it's not happening.
Mark, what do you think? You like the list? You hate the list? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm neutral. I'm fine with the list. I mean, look, the hot team right now is what? Georgia? They're not in the top 10. I really, number 1, number 2, no one's really going to argue with those. They've been 2 of the most consistent programs. When they have down cycles, they're for very short periods. USC, when they have their down cycles, they tend to be longer for some reason. Sometimes it's self-inflicted. So you could take 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, put them back in a hat, toss it around, and you can make an argument that they could be number 3 on the list. I mean, if you take USC, just their entire history, the big picture, 11 national championships, 8 Heisman trophies, When they're not in trouble by the NCAA, they're always doing well. You could probably say, hey, maybe they're tied for second. But, for me, it's all about consistency. And I think over the last 25 years, you could say Alabama and Ohio State have been more consistent than USC or Oklahoma or Michigan or Notre Dame.
Yeah, this is certainly a list that rewards consistency, which is why Notre Dame's at 5 and USC's at 6. Because here's the reality. USC and Notre Dame at their best, it's not close between those programs and Michigan. It's just not. Michigan, I know Michigan won a title last year. That's the first time they won it in my lifetime, I think. And the reality is Michigan has been a consistently good program that is not very often great. That's not true of Alabama. Alabama has had, I mean, arguably the two most successful college football coaches of all time have both been Alabama coaches. So that says something. Ohio State very seldom is down for very long. The same is true of Oklahoma. They've had some down years, but Notre Dame at number 5 strikes me as nonsense. Notre Dame is, and part of this is the way Notre Dame does such a good job of selling their own history and their place in college football lore. But Notre Dame can't be anything other than, in my mind, number 1. And I say that as a USC fan who grew up hating Notre Dame. But the reality is, Notre Dame, if you ask people who aren't college football fans to name a popular college football team, they probably still say Notre Dame in numbers bigger than everybody else. And that's with Notre Dame not winning in a very long time. The other thing that jumps out at me is there's no Miami in the top 10. And I understand that Miami had a long time period where they were absolutely nothing until they became powerful in the 80s. But that's a program with what, 5, 6 national titles? And when Miami is competently led, they don't have to recruit outside of like their 3-block radius to put together an incredible roster. So I'm a little bit surprised they're not on there, and I think they probably deserve a top 10 slot, even though they did very little before 1980.
I was going to say, when your program starts, when Howard Schnellenberger takes over,
I'm with you. It's just
why
it's
the
just
same
that
Florida State doesn't belong on the list.
Yeah, but Florida State, Florida State has a couple national titles. They don't have 5 or 6 like Miami does. I mean, but anyway, these lists are always fun to argue about. Nebraska's number 8. Nebraska probably would have been higher 15 years ago, and 15 years from now, Nebraska probably wouldn't be in the top 10. That's one of those sad cases where it's an incredible fan base, an incredible history. I'll be surprised if they can hold on. In light of how tough it's going to be for them to recruit like the other programs can. Okay. Are you ready? Scott, are you ready? Are you ready to play our game? And if you're not sure,
I am only here because of the game.
Well, good. This is the first time ever that anyone other than Mark Holkin or Eric McKinney has played Arledge's 10 Questions. Here's the thing. If you don't know the rules, Scott, the rules are essentially whatever I want them to be. We're going to ask you 10 questions. I'm going to sometimes award points, sometimes take points away. That's just the way it is. Don't complain. Mark likes to complain, but he just costs himself when he does it. Okay, so here we go. This is exciting. The first time somebody from the outside comes to challenge, I was going to say our reigning champion, but I'm not sure that's right. Didn't Eric win last week?
I am the champion.
Okay. It is the reigning champion. All right.
So who owns the most participation trophies?
Well, I actually don't know. We haven't kept track of overall records. I can say this: I'm often confused. I'm often accused of cheating Mark. That's not true, but I'm often accused of that. And so if you just listen to the level of complaining, I have to assume that Eric has more wins, but I actually don't know that to be true in reality. I don't know. Okay, here we go. Question number 1. We'll start with the newbie. Is this USC team being unfairly overlooked by college football pundits? Yes or no, and give me a quick explanation why.
Yes. if you are talking about the guys with the loudest voices, I would say yes. I just, yeah. My quick answer is, why is USC such a big topic of focus for some of these people in the media across the country, especially Paul Feinbaum goes to SEC media days, and Lincoln Riley's now the topic. So I think it is unfairly. Sometimes it almost seems like it's scripted in some ways.
Mark Holken, what do you got?
Yeah, Scott actually took the back half of my answer there with the whole Paul Feinbaum thing. I'm reading it as unfairly. So I want to say yes, they are being unfairly discounted. You know, LSU's not being discounted. Their defense was just as craptacular as USC's was last year. They replaced their defensive coaching staff. They needed those help in the transfer portal to improve the talent on their roster. So yeah, I do think it is interesting that USC's media day is until next week. Meanwhile, you know, Paul Feinbaum's got Lincoln Riley all over his mouth, and I can't figure it out where the derangement syndrome is coming from. What spurred it on? So yeah, I think unfairly is a good way of categorizing this question.
Keep Lincoln Riley's name out of your mouth. Is that what you're giving us here, Mark? Okay, look, here's the thing. You're both right, and you both made points that I would have made. The fact that Feinbaum's talking about USC right now, that's actually a good thing for USC. I like it when people are talking about USC because that means USC isn't as irrelevant in college football as they were, say, in the Paul Hackett or Clay Helton years. But I think that there is a great deal of unfairness because, as Mark pointed out, LSU had the same shortcomings. Yet everybody's looking at LSU and talking about them being on the verge of a great season with their brand new quarterback and their defensive overhaul. I don't see that they're in any different position than USC is. LSU also was a program that badly wanted to get big guys in the interior, the defensive line, and Brian Kelly comes out and says, "Yeah, we're not able to pay enough to do it." So I do think that it's a little bit unfair. Good answers for both of you. We're going to start off 1-1. All right. Question number 2. A perfect Arledge's 10 questions question because it's somewhat ridiculous. Scott, who are the 2 most intense USC coaches you've seen? And if you put those 2 guys in a cage fight, who comes out the winner?
Marv Goo and Ed Orgeron. And Marv Goo will always come out the champion in my book. So
huge size disadvantage. Huge
size doesn't matter. This is not a sexual encounter, Arledge.
hey, easy. It's a family show.
Size does not matter.
I'm actually not sure
about
it's a family
Marv
show. I don't know if there are any children that watch this. Probably not. Okay, so Edo, Marv Goo, you're picking Goo. Mark, what do you think?
So I'm going to go one coach from one side of the line, one coach from the other side of the line. I got Tim Davis in the cage with Coach Orgeron, only because I wasn't there to see Coach Marv Goo do his thing. Now, with that said, this would be a really bloody battle, but I think Tim Davis has God on his side. Because
God wants 4 yards. I know that.
God wants.
Here's the thing, though, and maybe it's just bluster. Maybe he didn't mean it. But it wasn't Tim Davis that was ripping off his shirt and challenging people to fight. It was Ed Orgeron. I think Ed knew something about his capabilities in a scrap. That's what I think.
He had a few in his day.
I don't doubt that. Okay, you both get a point again. I like both answers. It's 2-2 going into question number 3. Question number 3. Give me the theme song for Lincoln Riley's USC program at this point. Mark, what do you got?
So you know me, I put a lot of thought and effort into these type of questions.
I don't. Yeah, that's true. These are your questions.
I was going to go with Jackson Brown's Running on Empty.
That's painful.
Exactly. But I said, you know what? Lincoln Riley and this USC team, they're going through a transition right now, specifically Coach Riley. So I thought about it. I said, you know what? He's evolving. I'm going out with Diana Ross's I'm Coming Out.
Okay. Scott, what do you got?
I'm going straight to the okay. Well, when we started the show today, we talked. Scott showed up to be the rah-rah. Since you guys are off talking smack about this
That's
much
not
loved
fair.
football
Honest
program.
analysis is what we do, Scott. If you haven't
Oh,
watched the
stop
show,
it.
I don't want you
All
to
right.
come in here and start taking shots. But give me your answer.
All right. And I'll be saying this because you've heard my feedback on how I felt about Lincoln Riley, despite the fact that part of the criticism that we do have for him is the decision making that he had with his staff. All that aside, moving on up from the Jeffersons is going to be the theme song, because I think that there was a lot learned last season, and I think that what we've seen from Lincoln Riley and the USC football program is certainly something to be positive about. And I'm of the belief that at some point within the next 3 years, I don't know about winning a national championship. That's a really hard one to call. But USC is definitely going to be competing for a national championship in the next 3 years. So let's rack this video here, so we can either slap me around in 3 years, or we can say, "Gosh, Scott, you're really smarter than I thought."
You're not smarter than I thought, but I thought you were smart when you came in. The thing is, though, you took a shot.
You might get a point.
No, you don't. Mark Hogan gets a point because you took a shot at the two of us, and that's unacceptable. The right answer, by the way, is Olivia Newton-John. Let's get physical. Okay. Question number 4. I hope. Question number 4. Scott, start us off here. Most delusional college football fan base. A lot of options.
I mean, there are a lot of options. I'm just going to focus right now on Oregon, and I know you won't have any problem with that.
No. You're playing to the judges now, but go ahead.
Hey, I'm one behind here, Nobody said that, that I might not be a good player, but I'd make a good coach. So anyway, that's basically my answer is Oregon, and I'm just basing this off of right now, because that fan base does not think that the reason that they have 5 stars lining up to go to Eugene is not because of money. It's because of structure and tradition. I mean, if you come on.
Yeah. No, look, Mark, right now that this is going to be a very difficult question to win. You know that. We all know that. But I want to see what you've got. What can you do?
You cannot spell delusional without a U and an O. So, am I talking about Oklahoma? Am I talking about Oregon? Does it really matter? You can't spell delusional without an O and a U.
Yes. And you also scouted the judge because you knew that going after the OU people would also make me happy. And it does. But the point's going to go to Scott Schrader. It's 3-3. Okay. Question number 5. Mark, did Michael really have to kill Fredo?
So look, there is literally one rule. Don't go against the family. And he didn't just go against the family. He went against the blood of the family. So the answer is yes. And he's lucky he waited till his mom died. Because if I was Michael, it wouldn't have taken that long. And I wouldn't have to have all that guilt build up over the years.
Okay. We got one vote for yes. Fredo had to go. What do you think, Scott? Did he have to die? Wasn't there another option?
No, there was no other option. Not in that world. That's just how it is. It's a world that I've never lived in, and I'm not really all that familiar with mob life. But based off what we do know about the mob, which is probably very little, but the movies make it seem like they have an idea of what's going on. The betrayal is one of those things that's like a non-negotiable.
Okay. The answer goes to Mark Culkin. The point goes to Mark Culkin for one reason and one reason only. Scott admitted that he didn't know what he was talking about. So I liked his answer. But when you tell me I have no idea, I don't know what I'm talking about, I have to give the point to Culkin, who does think he knows what he's talking about, even though he probably doesn't. All right, Scott, best arm you've ever seen from a college football quarterback?
Oh, man. It's just every time that I've seen like an article or something talking about quarterbacks, along those lines about who has I always go back to Jamarcus Russell. You know, it's just that was the guy, and and prior to him, the guy that I always seem to have brought up was Jeff George. And honestly, I don't think I probably haven't even seen him throw the ball all that much. But the one thing that I remember most about Jeff George is he overthrew a lot of guys. And Jamarcus Russell was probably a lot along the lines of a Jeff George as far as his NFL career was concerned. But I think that Jamarcus Russell's the no-brainer for me.
Jamarcus Russell, good answer. I did see Jeff George throw the ball. I saw him throw the ball in the Coliseum in 1989, and I didn't like it. 13-0 lead, and you give up 2 touchdowns to Jeff freaking George, including one. The ball gets batted up in the air by safety. I don't know. Disappointing. Mark, what do you got? You got an answer better than those guys?
No, he raised a couple of names I had on my list. We could bring up Todd Marinovich.
No, we can't. Not Marinovich wasn't in the same class. That's not true. Who else do you got?
Well, I got Carson Palmer.
Carson Palmer had a good arm. Yep.
Got Jim Everett or Chris Everett. But because I'm a homer,
yeah,
I'm going Carson Palmer.
Carson Palmer did have a fantastic arm. Caleb Williams had a fantastic arm,
yeah.
and I don't know if it was Carson Palmer. I don't know if it's Jeff George level. I mean, look, John Elway is one that I didn't see him play at Stanford. I was too young. I certainly saw him play in the NFL. It's hard to imagine many people throwing a football harder than John Elway threw a football.
Yeah.
That being said, I don't think that Todd Marinovich had a big arm, so I'm not going to give Mark the point. I'm going to go with Scott Schrader. It's 4-4. Okay, here we go. Hey, Mark, this is your kind of question. If you don't get this point, this is one of those times in a game where you can say, if they don't convert this opportunity, they're probably not going to win the football game. Okay, this is where we are for you right now. Best ever line from a rock song. Go.
All right, so I'm not going wide left or wide right on this one. 9 Inch Nails. I want to blank you like an animal.
Interesting.
Can't say what Scott said earlier, but I think everyone.
Because I criticized him because it's a family show. I understand, and I appreciate that. I appreciate you looking out for the young ones. Scott, what is the best ever line from a rock song?
Well, it's this country music count? Or is that going to give him
that doesn't sound like a rock song, but you can give whatever answer you want to give, Scott.
All right. Well, you can't have any pudding if you don't eat your meat. Ooh. That's my line right there.
I don't even know what song is that.
Pink Floyd, dude.
You can't have any pudding if you don't. You know what? I've never understood Pink Floyd. I've never been able to figure it out. I've never been able to figure it out.
But the line I was going to say was from God Bless Toby Keith, who I've seen a couple of times, and I've been known to listen to in my car. I'm not as good as I once was, but I'm as good once as I ever was. That's my line.
That's a great song. Okay. The point goes to Mark Holken because I've never understood Pink Floyd. And I understand that they're legendary. I understand that it's my problem. But it is my problem, and I'm the judge. So that's what we're going to do. Okay. Scott, name a likely future USC head coach. Who's out there that you look at and say, I can see that guy being the head coach at USC someday?
Well, I think I might be stealing Mark's answer for all I know.
I hope so.
Going first, but I think when we were introduced to the new coaching staff earlier this year, I first thing I thought of was Matt Entz. So that's my answer.
Matt Entz is a good answer. Although, unless Lincoln Riley leaves, I suspect Matt Entz is going to have an opportunity too quickly. But maybe. Guy certainly has the right resume. He seems like a future USC head coach. Mark, who do you got other than Entz?
So he gives me a Mike Tomlin type of vibe. Young dude, intense, hits like a Mack truck, defensive mind. I think one day Taylor Mays can be a head coach.
Taylor Mays. And the timeline probably works better with Mays too.
Oh, give him 10 years from now. I'm not saying tomorrow. Not even 5 years from now.
Taylor Mays. So the great thing about Taylor Mays was, and this is in the early days where they would throw you out of games for hitting people the way Ronnie Lott did every single week, and Mays did it anyway. He didn't. He just did it anyway, and that was fantastic. That being said, Scott probably did steal your answer, and he's going to get a point. It's 5-5. Ince is almost certainly a guy who could be a USC head coach at some point in the future. All right, here we go. Better series, USC Stanford or USC Cal? This question might be too easy. I wrote it down and I thought that's probably too easy. I think I know what both of you are going to say. We'll see who justifies it. Mark, what's the better series?
Oh, it's easy. It's by far the USC Cal series. It's the oldest, rivalry between the schools. If we're matching up all four of them, or excuse me, all three of them, USC, Cal, and Stanford. USC has been playing Cal longer than Stanford. Cal, even though they don't have the record to support it, their fans care about football. The Stanford fans really don't.
Throwing batteries at people doesn't mean that you care about football, Mark.
Well, I have a soft spot for Cal, only because they have not been to the Rose Bowl since the Eisenhower era, 1959. And I know how close they came in 2004 and how much fun I had at that game inside the Coliseum.
One of the great games in recent history.
Absolutely. So there's some animosity there between the schools, the players going back through their history, the fan bases. And you know what? I like going to Top Dog every other year. So because of that, Berkeley gets the nod.
We got to vote for USC Cal. Are you going USC Cal? Or are you going USC Stanford, Scott?
For me, it really didn't take a whole lot of thought. Mark put some nice thought into his reply, but it's Stanford for me, and it's based off of, you're talking about two similar schools, private in the way that they're private. I think that Stanford has been kind of considered more of a rival. I don't think you can actually call it that, but I think as far as is a game that fans would pay money to go see if they had to choose one or the other, I think it's a no-brainer to pack up the family and head to Palo Alto versus Berkeley.
So here's the thing: they both of those series have their merits, but Stanford is a program that over the years has stung USC, even when USC was good, right? I mean, Stanford took down maybe the most talented, or at least tied, I guess, but one of the most powerful, 78 or 79, right? We're talking about one of the most talented USC teams of all time. Stanford also had a run where they were a legitimate top 10 program, and doing it in a way that looked like old USC the way they played. So I think Stanford is the right answer, and Scott Schrader gets the point. He's up 6-5 with only one question left. Now listen, okay, go ahead.
Putting Stanford on USC's out of conference schedule now sounds really appealing, doesn't it, Chris?
Well, I don't know. I don't want them on the schedule because you'll be rooting for a close loss. I don't want to put it. This is the worst moment, Scott. An explanation. You weren't here for it. It's the single worst moment in Inside the Trojans Huddle history, and we've been doing this for
out of context, years. Scott. Don't listen to the judge right now.
He really wanted to see a close loss to Stanford for reasons that none of the rest of us could figure out and still can't.
Really, we weren't talking about strength of schedule? That wasn't the topic?
I don't even care. Yeah, I was. You know what? I'm tempted to give Scott 2 points for that last one, just because I'm angry now about that old Stanford thing again.
You can do it.
Okay, I will. It's 7-5, Scott.
Okay, now listen, Scott, it was predetermined you were going to win the game.
It's not predetermined because this is the 3-point question. Question number 10 is a 3-point question. Here we go. And Mark, you're going to get to answer first. I'm going to give you every advantage because people think I try to cheat you and I don't. You get to go first. It's a 3-point question. All you have to do is knock this out of the park, and you're the reigning champion still. Okay?
Lob the softball.
Is college football headed towards even greater popularity, or is it on its way to a crash? Is there a college football bubble that's about to burst? Mark, let's hear it.
So you said, is it on its way to a crash? I think right now college football, it's at a crossroads. It's on its motorcycle, and it feels like it's going into a speed wobble. So the chances of it crashing, high. I'm not a fan of the direction college football is going right now. It's going way too fast for its own good. Slow down. See what works. See what doesn't work. Before we implement the 14-team playoff system, let's try the 12-team. Let's see if it works. Let's see how well it works. So yeah, just based off the way fans are talking, my own feelings, talking to other people, yeah, I'm not sure there's that same enthusiasm for college football right now. Not like it was 10 years away, not even close.
All right. So Mark wants to short college football stock. I don't know. Scott, I know you have some concerns, but I'm curious to see whether you're going to come on here and be the rah-rah guy again. Where's college football headed? Is it going to continue to increase in popularity, or is the bottom going to fall out?
Well, yeah, it goes back to just talking about the structure that is lacking currently, and I think that we're still, a year, 2 years, 3 years, however long away from kind of getting to where we think this is all going to end up, and it's just going to be like 60 some teams or whatever the number is going to be. I don't, that's kind of stuff I don't know about. But you're only going to have a limited number of teams that are going to have a chance to play for a national championship every year. And there is no way that there's not going to be some type of structure at some point to what is going on. And maybe it's just going to be kind of forced upon them because you're going to have to start paying the players. They're going to be considered employees. I might be getting way ahead of myself, but I just think there's too many smart people in charge, and there's far too much money at stake for the commissioners of the Big Ten and of the SEC and the Big 12 and so on. I think they do have some really good people in charge of those conferences, and I think that'll end up being part of getting to the point where there's basically one league. I think that unless there are some changes, I'm just going to assume there's going to be some structure put in place, and I don't think that college football, if that's even what we're going to be calling it in 10 years, is going is on a downward spiral.
So this is a tough one. And it's a tough one because we've seen so many changes so rapidly recently. And just about everybody who loves college football has some things to complain about, like legitimate complaints. The free agency, the NIL, the tradition falling apart, Cal and Stanford and the ACC. What in the world is that all about? It's a crazy time. But here's the thing. College football is about to soar in popularity because this 12-team playoff is going to be insane. College basketball would have been ruined but for the NCAA tournament, right? It used to be that guys would stick around for 4 years. You'd actually know who the players are. Now they show up for 1 year. They don't even finish the school year. They go off to the NBA. Yet the NCAA basketball playoff is still wildly popular. The football playoff will be an even better product. College football will figure out how to solve these problems that we're complaining about. And I'm going to give you a chance to respond, Mark, before I award points. But I think the college football 10 years from now will be even more popular than it is now. Mark, am I wrong about that?
So if we're talking specifically about the playoffs or the NCAA 68-team tournament, sure, widely popular. People are going to tune in for a couple of weeks. But what happens to the regular season? I mean, that we got to take the whole big picture. That's where I'm looking at it. If all of a sudden now we're going to cheapen the regular season because we're saying, well, three losses, you're in the playoffs. You got a chance still.
Yeah, look, that's a fair point. College football had the best regular season of any of the major sports, and it always did because every game was absolutely critical. The more teams you let in the playoffs, the less likely that is to be true, right? If you go to 16 is way too many. By the way, 16 is too many because before the season starts that Alabama's going to be in the playoff, and because it's going to be in the top 16, and that means that if it loses its 3 biggest games, it still makes it in. That's nonsense, and we probably are headed that way, but not yet. Not yet. I think we're still in a position where if you lose more than 2 games, you're probably not going to get in. And we're in a position where if you look at if you look at the talent that's building up in the two biggest conferences, going through the schedules that these teams have and losing only 2 games is no joke. You look at USC schedule this year, you look at Michigan's schedule this year. I mean, going through those schedules at 10-2 is going to require something special. So I think college football, despite its problems, I think it's going to increasingly become more popular. The 3 points go to Scott Schrader, who finishes with a 10-5 blowout win. Congratulations, Scott, on walking in as a rookie and just beating up on the old champion. Really, really fantastic.
Yes.
I mean, it's pretty exciting.
I've been training for 3 years for this moment.
I can tell. I can
The
tell.
41-point underdog came in and surprised me. Is that what happened? Is that what just happened?
I don't think
Okay,
he was
well,
a
this
40
kind of
point
reminds
underdog.
me. This moment reminds me of back at the I don't even know what year Nike camp it was when Drake Jackson was going into his senior year, and all the top players in Southern California show up for the regional qualifier for the opening, which is a big, huge event they had every July up at the Oregon headquarters in Portland, Oregon, Beaverton, Oregon. And so Drake Jackson had this incredible camp performance. Like in most of our minds, there was like no doubt he was the MVP for the defensive lineman. But after the event, it went to Kayvon Thibodeau, okay, who had a great day too. So it's not, but it was clearly to most of us, it was Drake Jackson. So we're talking with Willie McGinnis. I probably shouldn't be saying this, but because it wasn't Willie's decision, but there's like, God, we thought like Drake was going to get the MVP, and Willie was basically like, oh God, the MVP was determined well before we even started today. So here we go.
Well, wait a minute, Scott, are you saying that this game was rigged from the outset?
No.
Because that's what it sounded like. And listen, I will not tolerate anybody attacking the credibility of this game or its commissioner. I'm not going to tolerate that. So you're going to lose 4 of your points. And the final score is now 6-5. But listen to me. This is very important.
Well, it feels a lot more fun now. It's a lot more. It was close now.
I can't. It is. It was a barn burner. Now I can't figure out which one of you is Drake Jackson or which one is Thibodeau. But I got to be honest. After watching the game, I'm not sure I'd compare either one of you to either one of those guys. I do think this is an example of a champion with a questionable chin, and we all thought there was a chance that he might get knocked out. That's what I thought going in. This felt like who was it? Pinklin Thomas, or who was the guy that was champion when Mike Tyson knocked him out? Trevor Burbick, maybe? I think it's Trevor Burbick. It felt like a Trevor Burbick situation where you think if somebody comes along, they'd probably knock this guy out. Okay, anyway, that's all I've got to say. Anybody want to say something to the people before we sign off? We have just a couple minutes. Mark, do you have something you want to say?
Don't forget, WeAreSC.com. Don't forget we got that 2 months.
$1. It's $1, 2 months. Come on. If you haven't done it, how cheap are you? Listen, I might give you the $1. If you contact me and say, Chris, I want to do it. I cannot find $1. Will you give me $1? I might give you the $1. I'm not going to make the promise because I may not believe you. But if I believe you, if you really can't afford the $1, we'll find a way to figure it out. All the rest of you, just knock it off. It's $1. Find some change in the cushions of your couch, and let's get it going. Scott, anything you want to say to the people before we sign off?
Yeah, get your calculators at and figure out what that $1, divided by 30 days a month, what that ends up costing you. Now we're doing it divided by 60 days.
It's less than 2 pennies a day.
Yeah, it's not all about. It's not even about like these. You guys put on these great shows every week. We have our content that covers recruiting. We have our content that covers the team. Got a lot of great people that are providing that. But what makes our site great at WeAreSC.com is our community, our subscribers, our message board. The Gary P. Trojan Huddle board is rocking. It's popping. It's a place where you want to hang out. Why wouldn't you want to hang out with fellow USC fans that are informed like you are and are passionate like you are and want to see this team win football games?
And maybe you're an Oregon or an Oklahoma fan who stops by just because you have no life and you have nothing else to do. And if you want to give us the buck and sign up and come to the message board so we can make fun of you, do that. That's also appropriate. Okay, that's all we have to say. Guys, good show. Appreciate it. Scott, welcome to the club. You now have a varsity letter for Inside.
Yeah.
Right. Next week, USC Media Day, Wednesday next week, in fact. So
Okay, well, we should have all kinds of stuff to talk about. Well, wait.
season is upon us, folks.
Okay, yeah, look, it's close. That's all we
Thank
have to say.
God. Thank God.
Until next week, fight on, everybody.